Hello Model Layers, and welcome back to another video. In today's video we have a very special thing. We'll be touring the West Grove History Center, and the curator is going to give us a whole tour and explanation on how he got into this. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be touring the West Grove History Center, and we have Scott Steele here who's going to tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you, Mateo. Yeah, I'm Scott Steele. I actually own the museum. I own the building. I own the collection. I grew up here in West Grove. Actually grew up on this. We're located at Prospect Avenue, 513 Prospect Avenue in the Borough, West Grove. I grew up on the street. I've been collecting sort of since I was a kid, but seriously collecting West Grove memorabilia since my early 20s. So I've been collecting for almost 50 years at this point. And I only collect West Grove. I got my interest in local history through a Avon-Grove junior high school social studies teacher named Paul Rodabaugh. And as part of his 7th and 8th grade curriculum, he actually taught a local history course. And Chester County history, Avon-Grove history, London Grove history, West Grove history. And so that really is what sparked my interest. I then started collecting, and eventually I was fortunate enough in 2023, early 2023, to buy this building, totally renovate it, and then open my own museum. So I have around just under 2,000 square foot of display space. I have a research library and an office to house my collection. So
that's great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to do this tour, and I hope that this will promote this so more people can learn about it.
That'd be great. I really appreciate you coming out today. So, Mateo, you know, as I said earlier, all my memorabilia is really West Grove. I do also have quite a bit of Avon-Grove High School because I am a graduate of Avon-Grove High School 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But a graduate of Avon-Grove, so I have a little bit on Avon-Grove history as well. But it's really the Borough West Grove. I just want to start, when I first started researching and speaking, first of all, I've self-published 4 books. 2 I co-authored with other authors. First one was in 1982. It was West Grove Avondale. It's for the Chester County Tricentennial, Chester County PA's 300th anniversary. That was the first one I did with some other authors for Avondale. Then I co-authored with another West Grove historian, he's deceased, but John Ewing, for West Grove's 100th anniversary. Then I did a fire company history.
Wow.
About killed me reading 110 years worth of minutes by the time I was finished, many of them handwritten. And then I did one, and I'll talk about a little bit later, on the Avon-Grove High School 1970 state championship basketball team. So those are the books. But I kid people that the ink's not dry on one of my publications, and someone tells me I got something wrong, and someone tells me I missed something, which is normally true, just a function of research. You know, I don't always get it right the first time. I will tell you, I correct errors in book 3 that I made in book 1. That's just a function. It's never on purpose, but it sometimes happens. But it's a hobby, but when I first started public speaking, I probably bored people to death if I look back, because I've really focused on like the buildings in town. You know, this building was built in 1860 as the first general store. This building was built in 1883 for the National Bank of West Grove and the post office, whatever. Why I learned with a little bit of maturity that people is what makes history interesting. So I could tell you the bank was built in 1883, but then if I tell you about the bank robbery in 1947, I got your attention, right? I mean, some people want to know that first story, but everyone wants to know the second story. So over time, hopefully I've improved how I present history through the lives of people that came before. So let me just tell you one quick, so this area is on early West Grove development. The first bond they floated in 1893, then a bond they floated to buy the water system from Joseph Pyle, the gentleman of Father West Grove. But West Grove broke from London Grove Township and became its own incorporated borough in 1893. So they held their first elections in 1894, February 1894, in a building still down there downtown today by Marone's Delicatessen, Marone's Sub Shop. It's called the West Grove Hotel. So elections, voting was held there. There was 20 positions. So this is February of 1894. They're setting up a brand new government for the Borough of West Grove. So there's 20 positions on the ballot: 6th council, 6th school board, mayor. At the time they called that position Burgess, but mayor, justice of the peace, tax collector, etc. So 20 positions. There's 202 registered voters in town, 65% Republican, 35% Democrat. My guess is today town is switched.
Yeah.
Haven't looked at it, but my guess is the mix in the borough switched. But 65% Republicans, 35 Democrat, 202 registered voters. I don't know how many voted. I probably need to go figure that out someday. But the Democrats won all 20 positions.
Wow.
Now, why? That was because the Republicans had nerve to nominate women for 5 of the 6 school board positions. Who voted in 1894? Men only. So the men of town came out and punished the Republican Party for nominating women to school board, and therefore an entire suite of Democrats won our first election in town. So those are the kind of stories that I now tell instead of telling you the date in which the bank building was built. So Matteo, I have a lot of memorabilia, early businesses in town. Some were here when I was growing up as a kid, some weren't. That's always a big interest to people who visit the museum. Also, the West Grove Hospital, the Jennersville Hospital, which will open, I think, next week, in a week, its origins were here in the town of West Grove. During the Spanish flu epidemic in 1918, Dr. William B. Ewing, the second of 3 generations of Ewing doctors in town, because of all the deaths and illness associated with the Spanish flu, he started his own hospital. He bought a Hotel Roseboro in town. It was a temperance hotel, meaning no alcohol. He bought the hotel, turned it into a hospital. Over life of that hospital, which closed in 1959 when they built the Jennersville Hospital, which will be reopened by Christiana Hospital in about a week. In that period of time, he delivered over 6,000 babies were delivered in the hospital. They never had a mother die in childbirth. They had like 42 sets of twins and 1 set of triplets born there. First couple of years, Dr. Ewing funded that hospital all on his own. They did eventually set up a nonprofit called West Grove Hospital, or West Grove Hospital Association, and that then became sort of a nonprofit that funded it. But for the first few years, it was all out of Dr. Ewing's pocket. Sadly, in 1947, Dr. Ewing, in the process of delivering a baby, collapsed and died of an aneurysm. He actually died 3 days later in the hospital that he created, but another doctor took over the delivery and 1 doctor started treating him. But he probably was happy that he died. His nephew, who was a 3rd generation of doctors, Dr. Agnew Ewing, was quoted that Dr. Ewing died in the place he loved most, doing the thing he loved most, which was delivering babies. So, you know, sad ending, but a happy ending. I'm sure Dr. Ewing died where he wanted to be at the time.
Yeah.
So in this case is all items from businesses around town. Might be a garages, might be Sloan Ford, might be Avon-Grove Chevrolet, could be a restaurant, could be the Wooden Shoe Inn at the edge of town, things like that. Let me just talk a little bit about the collecting business. When I first started, I'd go to auctions, home auctions normally in town. I'd go to estate sales, might go to a postcard show up in Lancaster. Then eBay came. So I've hundreds of items I've purchased on eBay. Again, I only purchased West Grove. Yeah. I decided early in my collecting not to, because I grew up in town, not to focus on Landenberg or New London. It was just West Grove, not even Avondale. I have a few things, but mostly West Grove. So then eBay came, I started buying there. But I would say the wonderful thing is every time I'm open, someone shows up and donates something. I think when you and your mom and your brother were here, a gentleman came in, he gave me a couple, I haven't hung them yet, but local real estate signs, early real estate signs, things like that. A gentleman stopped in one day, and I'll show you in a little bit here, a demonstration, what I believe is a model casket from the West Grove Casket Factory. So every time I'm open, because none of us want to throw something away and they want to go someone good, and thankfully many people think that this is a good place to donate West Grove items. But I have some fire company items here. West Grove had one fireman killed in the line of duty. It was out in Tough Kenneman. Fire whistle blew around 4:30 in the morning. 26-year-old Raymond Walker lived on Edge Hill Avenue, which is just south of here, actually north of here, a couple streets down. He jumped on the back of the fire truck. They showed up in Tough Kenneman. It was a fire in a feldspar mill, some type of mineral. That fire, though, jumped from the mill to rail cars to a lumber yard. It was Mendenhall Lumber Yard. and it was actually one of the largest lumber yards in Chester County at that time. So a massive fire, 3 buildings, railroad cars. Raymond Walker shows up with West Grove Fire Company. Less than 30 minutes on site, a chimney collapses and crushes Raymond Walker, 26 years old, died. He's the only killed in action, killed in line of duty in West Grove Fire Company. When they celebrated their 100th anniversary, we tried to find a relative of his, but at 26 years old, he had just been married, had no children. He had a brother but at some point lived in South America. So sadly, we could never find a descendant of his to honor at that time. But just to show you the interest of, many people tell me stories of local history, and I usually repeat them. Sometimes like to try to prove them, but there's a little about, I'll tell you in a minute here a little bit about the shop we're in, but it was built by a gentleman named E.T. Chambers. And his son was Dick Chambers, who recently died in his early 90s. And Dick told me a story once that Longwood Gardens, that at the fire, Longwood Fire Company was there. And at that time, that fire company was private. It was owned by P.S. DuPont, who owned the mansion that is now Longwood Gardens. Yeah. And there was some concern that Longwood Fire Company was shooting water onto the chimney that fell over and killed Raymond Walker. And therefore, P.S. DuPont felt bad about that. And he came into town and bought the home that the Walkers were living in. Raymond Walker and his wife were living with his parents. Bought the house and told the family that they could live in that home the rest of their life free of charge. Now, someone tells you a fact like that, I believe Dick Chambers, the gentleman, had a tremendous memory and a lot of town history because he was a builder, and he and his father and brother were builders in town, so they knew a lot about the town. But before I repeat a fact like that, I like to research it. So I did a deed search on the house, and it took me back to 1928, October 1928, and there's Longwood Gardens, or Longwood, P.S. DuPont, coming in and buying that house. So it's a fact that Longwood Gardens, Longwood Fire Company felt that they might have potentially caused the death of the West Grove firemen, and P.S. DuPont stepped in and helped the family as a result. So those are the kind of stories I love to tell and research. So I'll tell you, in my collection, I probably have close to 200 rose catalogs. West Grove, for almost a century, or over a century, was home to one of the largest rose growers in America, Connor Pyle Nursery. Now, Connor Pyle actually started earlier in a company called Dingy and Connard, but Charles Dingy and Alfred Connard had a falling out, and so they set up 2 separate companies. Connard needed land in order to grow roses, so he teamed up with a dairy farmer named S. Morris Jones. Their company was Connard and Jones. He eventually changed that name of that company to Connor Pyle. The catalogs are fabulous. I mean, the artwork on these early catalogs is just beautiful. Yeah. The interesting thing is that I only have in my collection one shipping container. And I often wonder, and that came off of eBay, came out of New Jersey, and I often wonder, why aren't there more shipping containers floating around? Well, in my research, I've determined that in the very early days, so this rose business started in 1860, and they started mail order of nursery products in the 1870s. Well, in the 1870s, what they used as their shipping container for the roses were used cigar boxes. Connor Pyle, that time Connor and Jones, they had farmers running East Coast to taverns in DC, Baltimore, Philadelphia, buying all the used cigar boxes that they could. Yeah. And Dingy and Connor and Jones, Connor Pyle, they would take a 1-year-old bare root rose, put it in the cigar box, stuff it with peat moss, which they bought out in New Jersey. That peat moss was wet, and that wet peat moss would keep the roots wet while it journeyed across the United States to whatever the shipping location was. So that's why there's very few containers, because the early containers were cigar boxes. The other interesting thing I learned is that they started a mail order business. They're said to be the first company in America to mail nursery products by mail. They're not first mail order catalogs, there were many others before that, but they're first to ship nursery products by mail. And so the other thing was, how do you get paid? Send cash through the mail? Well, they were actually paid in postage stamps. Now, you would mail in $1 worth of postage stamps, and they would mail you 5 roses or whatever the price was at the day. Well, Dingy and Connor Jones couldn't pay their employees with postage stamps. So what they did is they had a secondary market for postage. Matter of fact, there was so much postage being sold in West Grove on the secondary market that the postal service in DC, the director of the post office, sent postal inspectors up here to say, where is all this postage coming from? And the answer to that was thousands and thousands of road shipments all across the United States. So another interesting fact you don't think about is, how did they get paid? Postage stamps.
Yeah.
Can't pay my employees in postage stamps, so I had to convert that into cash.
So
I know when you and your family visited, I told you the story of the bank robbery. I won't repeat it today, but if you want to visit my museum, I'll be glad to tell you the story. But I just wanted to point out the interesting thing about every time I think my collecting is going to stop, something very interesting shows up. I'll turn around here in a minute. I'd mentioned earlier, West Grove had a casket factory for a number of years. It was called Paxson and Comfort. It was a Philadelphia company. They were right in the center of town behind, the factory was located behind let's say the West Grove Fire Company, 3-story structure, limestone, built from local limestone. Just a massive building. It's a postcard view of it. And Paxson Comfort was a Philadelphia-based casket company. A company was put together called the West Grove Improvement Company, which built the building, and then Paxson Comfort rented it from them. They lasted in business till about the early 1920s. World War II, there was a large demand. Spanish flu epidemic, there was large demand, but it was sort of going in and out of business in the teens. Finally closed in the early 1920s. A millwork company, a rich developer from Philadelphia, from like 69th Street section of Philadelphia, named McClatchy, bought the factory and he turned it into a millwork company. So they were making doors and window frames and things for his building trade in Philadelphia, suburbs of Philadelphia, and also he was selling wholesale. Well, in 1928, October of 1928, fire started in the 3rd story of the casket factory. It burned for almost 3 straight days. There was 23 different fire companies on site from as far away as Baltimore, Maryland. There was a couple firefighters injured in fighting that battle. They did eventually get it put out, but it destroyed the entire building. I do have some pictures in my collection we can point out later in a minute here, of the building burned to the ground, basically. So unfortunately, McClatchy never rebuilt in town. But that one incident put over 100 men out of work in town, and then again the building was ultimately demolished. But I pointed out and then show a few weeks ago when I'm here in the museum, a gentleman stops in. His last name is Richards. His family's from the Kimblesville area, and they had a great-grandfather, I think it was great-grandfather, that worked at the casket factory. So they brought me this model. I'm not sure exactly what it is, whether it was a display casket, whether it was an infant's casket, maybe it was a toolbox. They do have another one that was converted into a toolbox. But again, did I know that sitting somewhere in the Avon-Grove School District is a model casket from the casket factory? No. Another example of that is this shotgun, which was used in the 1947 bank robbery in West Grove. Again, I won't take the time to tell that story today, but I'm working on this building, and my HVAC guy's over here on the floor cutting in ductwork, and a gentleman who I've known for years comes to the door and says, "You know anything about the bank robbery?" I said, "Of course." And they said, this was 2 years ago. And he said, "How would you like to have one of the shotguns used in the robbery?" Of course. So this gun has been sitting on the other side of town on a deceased businessman's desk. When the trial was over in 1950 for the second of the 2 bank robbers. The first one pleaded guilty in 1947, shortly after the robbery, but the second one sadly pleaded insanity and went into Norristown Mental Institution for a few years. When he finally went to trial was over, the state police just gave the shotgun to a local businessman. So again, a few years ago, someone was able to donate to me that shotgun. If you'll zoom in here also, there's some money in there, National Bank of West Grove. In the early days of national banking, if you were a chartered bank, you were able to get money printed with your name on it. It stopped about 1929 or so. But so National Bank of West Grove was a chartered bank There's the plaque which came off the side of the bank, which again is something that was donated to me on my opening day here in 2023.
Wow.
But so National Bank of Avondale had money, National Bank of Oxford, etc. But that's Westgrove's version. So. In this section is all my memorabilia on Avon-Grove School District. It was basically Westgrove schools pictured here as well. The initial consolidation in Avon-Grove wasn't the whole 5 townships and 2 boroughs that we know today. The initial consolidation was only Westgrove Borough and Avondale Borough and London Grove Township. Hence the name Avon-Grove came from Avondale and Westgrove. Interesting thing about that is neither one of the 2 towns, especially Westgrove, wanted to give up their smaller in-town schoolhouse. London Grove had 1-room schoolhouses. Westgrove and Avondale had larger 2-story brick structures, and it was for grade school through high school. Neither of them really wanted to, but ultimately they had a town vote and they agreed to consolidate. So again, that initially was just Westgrove Borough, Avondale Borough, and London Grove Township. So they chose a location in London Grove Township that's almost equal distance between the center of Westgrove and the center of Avondale. So if you went down to the red light in Avondale, and I went down to red light in Westgrove, and we started walking towards what is now the Avon-Grove Charter School, which was Avon-Grove's first consolidated high school, junior, senior high, we would almost arrive there walking at the exact same time. And that's because they chose a central compromise location in order to get both towns to buy into the concept so that Avondale didn't feel like Westgrove was gaining too much and Westgrove didn't feel like Avondale was gaining that. So this is all there. I'll just tell quickly, this sign was located in the Avon-Grove High School lobby. I walked underneath it almost every day when I went into high school, both junior and senior high. It celebrates the 1970 state championship in basketball. Avon-Grove won the first state championship in Chester County in basketball. So Little Avon-Grove beat the larger school districts of Coatesville and Downingtown and Unionville and Kennett. The other interesting thing about this team is that they were 25-0. I mean, it's hard enough to win a state championship, but they were undefeated. The real claim to fame, though, was in the Eastern Regional Finals, they played a team called Mansfield High out of Tioga County, which is on the New York border, one of the top counties in Pennsylvania on the New York border. And Mansfield High's star player was 6'11" Tom McMillan, who in February 1970 was featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated under the banner, "The Best High School Player in America." Tom McMillan was averaging over 50 points a game. He was the #1 scorer in all PIAA history. I think the record's since been beaten, but at that time, no one had ever scored never scored more points than him in high school basketball. So everyone was saying, oh, it's a shame Avon-Grove's playing Mansfield, or they probably could be state championship. So the game is played at the Harrisburg Farm Show Arena. At the end of the first quarter, it's 25-25. Avon-Grove's keeping up. They're a fast team, but not a tall team. The list of players is all listed there. At halftime, it's 48-33. Avon-Grove is losing by 15 points, 48-33. The other more interesting point, though, is Tom McMillan has scored 34 points on his own, one more than the entire Avon-Grove squad. So he scored 34 of the 48 points So at halftime, they moved from their man-to-man defense to a zone defense they called a box and one. That box included, these are twin brothers, Gary White in front of him, Barry White behind him, that's the box. And the one is, if someone tried to throw the ball to Tom McMillan, one of the other players would try to sink in. So Tom McMillan scored 34 points in the first half. He scored 34 points. Avon-Grove won 66-63. They then went on to blow out the Western Regional Finals to win the state championship. So that was a big big day in the life of Avon-Grove sports and Chester County sports. There were many sports writers that said that was one of the best basketball games that they had ever seen. So another thing featured in my collection are lots of pictures of Westgrove through its years. If people aren't interested in history, they're a lot of times interested in seeing pictures of history. So that's why I've lined the walls with many pictures. Many people donated them to them. The last time it was open, someone brought in 2 pictures locally. I haven't been able to scan them and add them to my collection yet. But that's it. I don't put originals up. I put copies of everything because I don't want Sun possibly to bleach the originals. But one of the things I skipped over here is movie theater. West Grove had its own movie theater from 1915 to 1980 when it was torn down. What happened is three local businessmen took an old general store in town and in 1914, 1915 converted it into a movie theater. It was called the Roseland, relates back to the rose business I discussed earlier, because one of the principal investors in that building was Robert Pyle, who from the Connor Pyle Nursery. So that's why they put the Rose name on the theater. This is a popcorn machine from that theater. I put many a dime or nickel in there to get popcorn out of it. Interesting is that I didn't realize as a kid that it never made popcorn. It just dispensed popcorn. They had big bags sitting over in the corner. They would fill it. There was a light bulb in there that would keep the popcorn warm. You put your dime in there, you'd hear this sound like a vacuum cleaner of it filling your bag down below. So that's something, another friend of mine, Jim Trella, bought it after they closed the theater, but a few years later he was willing to sell it to me, so I bought that from him. So this is, again, a sort of a fan favorite to a generation that grew up going to the movies there. I could walk from my house to that movie theater every Friday night, see all the first run Disney movies, see the Beatles' Hard Day's Night, see Planet of the Apes' first one. I mean, it was really a great thing that we could walk to the theater on a Friday night and enjoy. So I also have a research library. Many times when I'm open, people come in and just sit and read through different books. There are people who show up that see whether I have any pictures or information on their houses. Houses in town are difficult unless you're on the main street to have pictures of, but occasionally I will. Many times I'll agree to do a deed search for someone if they're interested. So this is a research library. This originally was a hardware room when it was a carpenter shop. I have a collection of yearbooks. I can't say I have a complete collection of Avon-Grove yearbooks, but I'm working on it. Avon-Grove was sort of late to the game in yearbooks. Their first yearbook was in 1947. So I do have a lot of the early years, but I'm still collecting. So just another thing I offer is a research library should people want to do any local history research. And again, many people do the weekends. I just want to point out one other wall over here. This is a wall of calendars from local businesses in town. They're artwork. I mean, they're just beautiful. They're the tractor dealer in town, butcher shop, hardware store, gas stations, insurance companies. So I just love this wall of calendars just because of their the beauty and the artwork, and they tell a history of businesses in town. This meeting house bench is from the original 1786 Quaker meeting in town. West Grove actually got its name from that Quaker meeting. In 1787, a local Quaker family donated 2 acres to the Friends meeting. The Friends that prior to that were either going down to New Garden Friends meeting down towards Tuff-Kenneman, or they had to go up to London Grove meeting in the north end of London Grove Township. There was such a large Quaker population in London Grove Township that they built a new meeting house. That meeting house was located on the western edge of London Grove Township, and that's where we got our name. They named that West Grove Meeting. Then as the town started to develop, the town really of West Grove really started to grow when the train came through. The train came through, was surveyed in 1857. First trains came through town in 1860. And the town grew with transportation, just like it grew further with the Route 1 bypass being built and things like that. But so West Grove got its name from the location of the meeting house on the western edge of London Grove Township. So that's probably one of the oldest things I have in my collection, because it would date to the late 1700s. So, all right, just one other thing before I talk about the shop that we're standing in here. These display racks I had built. First of all, I bought these old industrial carts, these 2 off of eBay, and then that one came out of an antique store in Strasbourg. I wanted more display space, but I didn't have any more walls left, and I wanted to be movable, so I can, if I want to hold a special event in here and clear the floor out, then I can just move these. So a friend of mine and his son, JR and Jeff Willard, own Avondale Machine Products. Jeff was in my high school class. They custom make these racks for me. I can either use magnets on things or just these little clips to. So that gave me like 6 more walls without me having to build a wall in the space. But just want to end on this contractor shop was built in 1946 by a local contractor named E.T. Chambers. I turned it into a museum in 2023. I totally renovated it. There was no, this building, except for the office, a little bit in the research room, had never been insulated or drywall. These were wide open stud walls when I bought it. So I totally renovated it, but it's a fantastic building. These trusses were built on site by E.T. and his carpenter crew. Matter of fact, when I bought the building, this back side of this one wasn't painted yet, and you could see it numbered 1122, where they put the wood together to build the trusses. So it just happened to be, I stopped in one day. It was previously, to me, was owned by a furniture upholsterer, his name Richard Shirkington, who was kind enough to agree to sell me the building. I stopped in one day and made him an offer and shook his hand, and then he stayed in here to work for 9 months, and then I started renovating. So it just turned out to be a wonderful structure for me. It gave me this display room, and then, as I said, an office and a research library. I just want to point out one other thing. I mentioned earlier a local businessman, Dick Chambers. He was a son of E.T. who built this building. He was the one who told me about Longwood Gardens buying the Raymond Walker home. He was 12 years old. He nailed that Pennsylvania license plate up there on there the year they built the shop. So that's my date stone, an old 1946 Pennsylvania license plate. So
as you saw, this is a great museum. You really should come out to see it. But he's not only a collector of history items, he's also a collector of antique cars. So I'll let him tell you about his 1955 Chevrolet truck.
Yeah. Actually, it's a 1954, but
54.
It's a 54 Chevy. This actually belonged to my grandfather, my mother's father, Rush Fisher. He gave it to me when I turned 16 in 1972. I drove it every day to Avon-Grove High School. Matter of fact, it's featured in my yearbook. I'll show you a picture before you leave. During 1972, our class was the first to start a best wheels. So I didn't win any, I didn't win most likely to succeed, but I did win one of the 4 best wheels.
Yeah.
I had this truck. At that time, I had chrome rims on it, had wide tires on the back with chrome rims. I had a white tarp, but everything else was original. I never messed with the engine, never messed with the interior. So the good news was when I retired about 5 years ago, I invested in having it restored. But so this was my grandfather's last vehicle and my first vehicle. I've had it 53 years now.
Wow.
It's a 1954 Chevy Model 3100 Advanced Series Design, they called them. It's a deluxe model, which means it has chrome, has 5-window curved windows on the corners. They call it 5-window. Has a 2-tone interior, things like that. So I've had it ever since I was 16 and still driving it today. It'll go to my daughter or my grandson next. I'm not sure which, but one or the other. Depends on what year I want to give it up.
Yeah.
But so it's just something, I guess it's just another proof that I can't get rid of anything,
Yep.
right? My museum's full of stuff I can't get rid of. Well, I can get rid of, but my mother's still alive at 95. And very happy that I still own this, and still, obviously my grandfather would be very proud if he knew that this still was on the road today. So,
yep.
All right. So you being a car collector, I had to drive it today. I couldn't not show up with my
Definitely.
with my truck. So yeah.
So where can everyone find you, and when are you open?
Yep. So I'm open on the first Sunday of every month from noon to 3. And I'm open anytime by request. I hold a lot of special events in here. West Grove Fire Company's met here. West Grove Boy Scout Troop 30 came. Southern Chester County EMS had a board meeting here. There's a Bible study every Thursday night in here. So I do a lot of special events, but mainly for open to the public. I'm open the first Sunday every month, noon to 3. I just didn't want to sit up here 52 weeks a year waiting for somebody to show up. So, but that's my open hours. But again, anytime anyone would like by request. And I had my own class reunion, had a party in here. I have class of 75 coming soon. I'm sure class of 76 will join me as well. My brother's in that class. So my brother and sister-in-law are in that class. So again, it's open for special events, but mostly first Sunday of every month. So.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for allowing us to take a peek inside your obsession with history of West Grove, and I hope people will come out and see it. It's really a great collection of all things West Grove, so it's a
Okay.
must see.
All right. Thank you very much, Mateo.
Thank you
Really
so
appreciate you
much.
coming out. Yep.